Oh,
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Two Wizards and a Mic, where myself, Shane, and
Andrew.
talk about D&D because we're old and we're on the way out, and soon we will be forgotten, but the game of Dungeons and Dragons will remain. So that was morbid, but hey, it's the first day of school, so there you go. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Like you said, first day of school, so I actually got some work done today. Yeah.
Well done, well done.
Yeah.
But everyone got off to school, and I'm assuming there was at least one Dungeons and Dragons module in like a backpack, maybe, as you sent her off.
I might have put a D20 in there. Sent some
very good.
Lambus bread in her backpack as the snack.
You know, could you imagine like any teacher? Well, you were a teacher for years, but
Yeah.
you know, would it be like, a kid brings out a snack and you'd be like, "What is that you have there?"
Mm-hmm.
Little note. Give this to the teacher if she asks. Nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this week
Everybody's
we're talking about
jockeying for positions right now, trying to figure out what class their kid's in because we just they emailed us this afternoon.
So you actually didn't know? It was basically like show up and
No, the very first day, often they stay with the teacher from last year for a couple hours or an hour, and then tomorrow the actual regular curriculum starts, and then the new class begins. So
I got to say that's actually not too bad to actually see the teacher from the previous year, hopefully, and then being transitioned into a new class. Because
yeah,
I went from a Montessori school to high school, and that was weird. And I really wish that I could have changed into some sort of wild shape when I was at school, because then I would have been much happier. But anyway, we're talking about Druids this week. Last week we talked a lot about the new stuff coming, which we will talk about again. But this week we're going back to another class, and we're going back to class and learning about Druids, which is one of my more recent favorite classes, because for the longest time I never played a Druid because I thought Druids were weird. But now I become a large scorpion quite often. So, but tell us about the Druids, because we need to know.
Yeah, so we're going through all the classes in D&D. So we've got a few left. We've done most of them, and this one also is a favorite of mine. Of course, when people say Druids, people especially older people, will think about the Celtic nature priests and who were in England, in the UK before the Romans arrived, I believe. So that's like 400 or 500 years ago. And it was quite a complicated, basically clan or different clans with Druids. And they ranked up. And then it reminds some people of Gandalf, how he changed from Gandalf the Grey to Gandalf the White, because the higher ranking Druids are actually in white robes, and the lower ones have darker robes usually.
That's cool.
So yeah, there's a lot of, and people connect them to Stonehenge and some of those large circles of stones that are found in England and Scotland. But actually, I don't think they were the ones who made them, but apparently they had knowledge about how they worked. So when people say Druid, they often think of those people, and there is a connection there for sure to D&D. So it's a spellcaster deeply connected with nature. They worship basically nature, sometimes a nature deity, but usually just nature itself. And shape changing into animal forms, as you mentioned, is usually a big part of Druids. And the original Player's Handbook for Dungeons and Dragons, the Druid was actually a subclass of a cleric, which, that makes sense. Like, it's sort of like a nature cleric in a way. And instead of, again, worshiping a deity, it's usually worshiping the wilderness or nature. Some of the versions in D&D, apparently, I don't have a lot of knowledge from about 2 to 4, the middle ages of D&D, but apparently some of those Druid classes were quite overpowered. So 5th edition pulled it back a bit. A notable druid is Merlin. Many people think of him as a wizard, but actually in some works, he is considered a druid. There's also Radagast. More people these days would probably know from The Hobbit. It's an actual Tolkien story, unlike Rings of Power. And then there's Pinkle Boulder Shoulder. Seriously, Pinkle Boulder Shoulder, who is a druid in the R.A. Salvatore novels. This large collection of fantasy novels, which personally I love. Because the writer does such a good job with action. The stories they're full of action and he writes it really well. He has that balance between there's still a fight, but he doesn't drag it on. And yeah, I think he does a great job. And then there are tons of examples of druids in terrible B movies. I could go on and on about those, but we won't. So the D&D class now in 5th edition, as I said, they reined them back in a little bit. They have decent hit points, so 1d8. Armor, light or medium, but you can't have metal or a metal armor or a metal shield because that's against the druid's connection with nature. Their weapons, I think the one that makes the most sense is the quarterstaff. I can see clubs and daggers, javelins, scimitar, sickle for sure. Sling, yeah, spear, but I don't know why mace is in there. Maybe it's a holdover from when they were part of the cleric class.
I would expect that's probably why. I mean, to me,
yeah,
in the description you just gave, I mean, yeah, maces kind of seem out of place.
Yeah,
I don't, the sickle has never been a weapon that you ever see get used.
not
Like
much.
to me, I can see them being kind of deadly in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
For like really close combat, but I see the sling being used. At the very generally at earlier levels, but and javelins all the time, daggers all the time, clubs all the time, quarterstaffs all the time. But sickles, I think there need to be some really cool sickles out there that are probably really really heavy damage and all kinds of things. So we need to find some of those out there.
Yeah, we need more. I agree. The cool thing is you get a herbalism kit, which if your dungeon master wants to, that could add a lot more to the game. Skills, you get 2 from Arcana, Animal Handling, Insight, Medicine, Nature, Perception, Religion, and Survival. So a lot of those are connected into their connection to the wilderness. Languages, they get a special language, a secret language. The secret language of the Druids, which is Druidic, which I don't think I've heard anybody use or bring up ever in our games, but we need to.
We haven't. Well, we've used. I want to say cantrips, not cantrips. What's the language for thieves?
Thieves can't.
Thieves can't. Where
we have done that
used. But Druidic, rarely. I mean, rarely. Actually, to be honest, I don't think I've seen that many Druids side by side. Like, you see them, a character, maybe run into the odd player or the odd NPC that's a Druid, but they've never really had a moment to kind of go, hey, how's it going? You heard anything on the news? Anything cool coming down the pipe? All right, cool. That just doesn't happen.
Are you in our circle of friends?
Exactly.
I definitely need to do that.
Druid book.
So features in general for the Druid. So wild shape, which is changing into a beast of an animal you've seen before. You can start actually using this twice, and you regain uses after a short or long rest. But at the beginning, the CR is not very high, only 1/4 for the beast. And you have no flying or swimming speed because that would be overpowered. You retain your alignment, personality, your intelligence, wisdom, and charisma scores. You assume the beast's hit points. You can't cast spells at this point. You retain features of your class as long as the new form can physically do it. And you choose what happens to your equipment when you transform. So this gets better as you get to higher levels. And it's obviously one of the best parts about being a druid. And when all your hit points are gone in combat, you revert back to your druid form, your original form.
Yeah.
So there are some high level features at 18th level to 20th level, but that's really high. I won't mention those because that's you're basically almost finished playing at that point. Subclasses. So there's two in the core book. We've got the Circle of the Land. So these are mystics and sages who safeguard ancient knowledge and rights and specific areas. They can actually regain spell slots during natural recovery when you do a short rest. You get extra spells connected to the area. So if you're in the Arctic, you get ones that are connected to that. If you're in the forest, etc. You can move through non-magical terrain without costing you extra movement. You can't be charmed or frightened by fey or elementals later on. And you, at one point, beasts and plants have to actually make a wisdom save, or they can't attack you. So that's pretty useful.
That's cool. My druid is not as high a level as to get that, but that's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, a lot of these things are definitely, it gets better as you go along. Circle of the Moon. So these are fierce guardians of the wild. They gather under the full moon, but usually act independently most of the time and are in the deepest part of the wilderness. So they have a lot of features that boost the wild shape. They can use the big thing is instead of taking an action to shape change to wild shape, you only need a bonus action. You can even use spell slots to regain hit points as your beast. You can transform into beasts with much higher CR. Your beast attacks later on count as magical attacks. And you can actually use your wild shape later to turn into an elemental. And a much higher level, you can actually cast Alter Self at will, which is pretty useful. So those are the two basic types. I think most people go towards the Moon Druid because a lot of what you can do as the Land Druid, you can also do as the Moon Druid. Plus, you get the Beast bonuses. But the Circle Druid does have those extra spells. The one of Circle of the Land, you do have some extra spells. Yeah.
I have to agree. That one's my favorite of those two because I think the spell lists are also different too. But we'll get into that in a sec.
Yeah, again the land one you get some extra spells, but not ones that the other druid couldn't choose. But you were saying the moon is your favorite or the land?
The Circle of the Moon's my favorite. I think I've used one of the other ones. I think Shepherd in one of the games for one of the druids, although that druid died early. But I didn't really get into that one too much because I died. Yeah, Circle of the Moon is usually where I go.
Who killed that druid?
This guy I know, some DM guy.
Did he use a giant crocodile?
Probably.
Yeah. That was, I believe that was that incredible, ridiculous session where you were sitting side by side with someone. You both rolled double ones on your death saves, and then the next turn you both rolled double ones again.
Yep, that was the one.
That was the one, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, because you had a close relationship with weasels.
Yeah, that was it was a very good. It was a great character, but
it was. Yeah,
stuff happens. What can you do?
Giant crocodiles come out of swamps. So we also have druids in our books. In the Monsters of the Underworld book, we have the Circle of Shrooms. So we have a druid who's closely connected with fungi,
which is kind of awesome,
especially magical fungi. We also have the Circle of the Griffin in our Monsters of the City book. Or no, hold on. No, it's in Monsters of the Wilderness, and it is a druid who's quite a good warrior, quite an effective warrior. So it's basically like combining a fighter and a druid, and sort of a Jedi kind of blend a bit. Yeah, what kind of a warrior druid, which I think is sort of like a Jedi. All right, so there are many, many spells. We're not going to go through them all, but there are some notable spells that druids could use. Um, Druidcraft is a one sort of like prestidigitation for wizards that adds these cool little effects that you could use. It would be very useful at low levels, but even at higher levels, they could be useful at times. They don't do anything spectacular, but they're really good for role play, I think. And they're really good. They could be really good if you were negotiating with a villager or something like that, or yeah, or maybe a large group of humanoids or something like that. There's also shillelagh, which I think the person in our group who's from Ireland just takes so that she can say it over and over.
And uses it really well too, which
She
is great.
does, yeah. So it basically boosts your quarterstaff, so it becomes more powerful. Thorn Whip is a wicked spell where you can actually do damage and then pull a creature towards you, which is, I think that's underrated. That's useful. Entangle sort of speaks for itself, but it's very useful. Fairy Fire. Now, this is one that I think whenever you have an opportunity to take this spell, no matter what spell casting class you are, because other casters get it too, but it is so good because it lights up your enemy if they fail their save. And now whoever attacks has advantage because your target is lit up.
And I think it's also used for casting so you can see your enemy through doors and things like that, which I think is probably the bulk of the time. And I don't think people consider the whole idea that they have advantage after that. So that's actually quite good.
Yeah, it can be very useful if you think something's invisible too, because it doesn't matter if it's invisible. If you get it, it's going to light up as well if you get the right target.
Right.
Good berry, I think underrated spell. So you produce these berries magically, and then if you eat one, you get 1 hit point. Plus, it's like eating meals for a whole day.
Nice.
So I think that's pretty useful.
You don't need rations after that.
No. One that's used a lot is bark skin, because if you don't have armor, it boosts you up. Even if you have armor, it boosts your armor class up to armor class 16, which is decent, especially for a spellcaster.
Right.
Beast Sense is pretty self-explanatory, but useful. Moonbeam, very powerful. So it does radiant damage, which can be useful against undead. It forces shape changes to return to their true form, and it does decent damage.
Yeah, I know that I've used Moonbeam 2 or 3 times because we ran into I think we ran into like an undead group of some sort, and I used that, and it did very well because you can move it around as the battle goes on. So that was great.
Exactly, yeah. Then we have Pass Without Trace, which is a very powerful spell. Your whole party, as long as they're within 30 feet, everybody gets +10 to stealth, and you can't be tracked by basically regular means or magical means. So if you do want to, decide the monsters, it's not a good day. Like, this is not the day we will fight. We will meet again. This is a really good spell to have at that point. There's lots of conjuring animals and elementals. I know your druid loves, and that's something you definitely need to do, because you can even, if your DM allows you can sometimes conjure a creature that can also conjure a creature.
Nice.
So
I hadn't actually thought of that. That's kind of deadly.
Yeah, it can be. That's why I say you'd have to check with your DM, because I think that's only possible with some of the new Fae creatures that have been added, because there aren't many Fae in the original rules, which is why I wrote that book. So there's also Insect Plague, which our party always seems to happen to our party. Reincarnate, which of course is very powerful, and it's a lot of fun when you don't know who you're going to come back as or what you're going to come back. I think it's great. For role playing, I think it's great.
I don't think we've used. I mean, we've in some of the games I've played. Usually, you do reincarnation by going to a temple somewhere. I don't think I've actually cast
Had
it.
a druid do it.
Yeah, that's actually kind of interesting. That's actually brilliant.
We did have somebody just in the campaign, I think maybe just before you started, or it was the really high level part of World of Mir. I'm not sure if you were there. And somebody died on this ship, and a druid was there, and they reincarnated them, and they were a halfling, and they came back as like a gnome, or they came back as something different.
Right.
And then they decided they wanted to die. They didn't want to be this new race, so they threw themselves off the ship. They went actually to fight a dragon turtle in the storm
by themselves,
which meant that was it. That they were done. Yeah, they threw themselves off the ship, and the dragon turtle had already been on the ship, like fighting people, and then it slid off the ship, and this guy jumped off the ship and landed on him. And then the last thing they saw was this like halfling sailing into the distance on the back of this dragon turtle, and they never saw him again. So he was like a 20th level halfling rogue.
That's kind of awesome, actually. Just
if you're gonna go,
the imagery that we can conjure from all the adventures that we've remembered. Oh my god, that's amazing.
Yes. Well, I think at that point I used one of the, is it Journey? Because the love of his life was on the ship. Isn't there a Journey song like I'll always be loving you?
Yep.
Isn't that Journey?
Yeah.
So I played that as it was happening. Tree stride. So this is very cool. I don't see many people using it. So you go in, as long as the tree is large enough.
I don't even know what that is. I don't recall.
Well, as long as the tree is large enough, you can walk into a tree and then walk out of another tree in the woods a certain distance away, which I think is super cool. And I actually came up with mushroom stride for some of my fate creatures who can do it with giant mushrooms.
That's awesome.
The druid can also use regeneration. So this is really useful if you've lost a limb and you still have it and you want to reattach it.
As in you have it from just carrying it with you? Okay.
Yeah. There's animal shapes. So this spell, you can turn willing creatures into beasts of CR4 or lower for 24 hours. So you could change your whole party into beasts, and then you can alter it too. You can change what the beasts are at a later point.
I want to do that.
I love that.
Of course, that sounds very high level.
It's very well.
Yeah.
Now we're getting up to, you just look at the spells I've mentioned, right? Regeneration, animal shapes, earthquake, tsunami, and true resurrection. So we're talking, this is like, this is white robe druids. This is the top.
That's kind of awesome because, I mean, as I said, I've only played druids more recently, and I have not actually got that high. I think I've maybe 8 or 9. So I'm kind of looking forward to this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And suddenly there was a tsunami.
Exactly. At high level is pretty awesome. And as you've said, we've had a lot of players choose druids in our campaigns. It's one of the most popular classes, actually. I know you've played, I think you've played 2 at least. You have one right now.
I have played 2. The one
you
that died,
Warren,
and then
yeah, you have Warren.
Oh no, actually, maybe 3. Maybe 3 now.
Because you had Warren that is a gnome druid right now, right?
Yeah.
And then you
before that was the rat guy, or the
weasel guy.
Oh my god, what was his name? Totally forgotten.
Yeah, me too.
I'd have to look that up.
And then was there another druid? that you did?
I'm thinking I have done a third druid. I can't think of
It wasn't one of your
who that was, but
tieflings. You had a
oh
bard tiefling for sure.
yeah, I could have. I might have. It's been so long. Stupid pandemic.
um, so pros, well, there's lots of pros. The wild shape is amazing. Because we haven't talked about it that much, but you often turn into these days, what do you choose?
Well, my character currently is really, because the character is not that strong or a really great fighter. I tend to use the idea that I'm going to turn into this large. I picked like the largest creature that made sense, and
Mhm.
it's a large scorpion, which has 3 attacks. It's very OP in a way, but it has enough hit points that in theory it could survive most battles, but at least getting hammered on the as as a scorpion and then reverting back into my other character or into my character's form. um, the big benefit is that, but also I tend to conjure bears at the same time. So I'll
Yeah.
have like large bears, then I'll turn into a wild shape into the scorpion. And that gives me some comfort that, whatever creature we run into, which I think I want to say we're like 8th, 9th level, or maybe a bit higher than that. I don't think we're
Around,
much
yeah, in
beyond.
the Dragon Cult campaign, you're around that level. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel that I can actually survive a battle without without too much concern. But I also like the idea that you can, if you're not a fighter, if you're a character that's a druid that's more about trying not to kill things, then you can actually have that almost like an emergency button, like I'm gonna die.
Yeah.
This is not great, and then turn into something, because eventually you'll probably not want to leave yourself completely defenseless, especially if you, I don't know, say you're in a situation where a couple of the party or 2 or 3 of the party are downed, and you're like the savior trying to heal people or whatever. But at the same time, if you get into a pickle, you can kind of go, you know what? I'm now a giant whale or whatever. That something that's going to hopefully get you through to the point where you can do some damage and then go back and heal somebody and get them off the ground or whatever. Those
Right.
kinds of things. Again, now that I'm thinking about that, though, you could turn into something very small that the opponent can't find. So that is a kind of an alternative to that. But yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I like it so that I can actually do some damage and then not die.
Right. Yeah, I think I was actually just going to mention that I don't think many times players in our campaigns have turned into a tiny creature in a battle to hide, but many times I think for sure you and other players have turned into small creatures, especially like a spider because they're pretty tiny,
Yeah.
or a cat or something. I mean, spider's really small, and then you've snuck inside somewhere, and then so it is very, very useful, as you say, the large to fight and the smaller to hide.
Yeah, a lot of like reconnaissance, like what's behind that door, what's over there, or if you run into a creature that in theory might be able to communicate some sort of information to you. And um, now, is there a benefit? So, say you run into like a rat and you turn into a
Mhm.
rat. Is there a benefit to actually turning, even like maybe if you had speak with animals or something, or something along those lines, it might not matter. But could you actually
Well,
communicate? I
usually you
don't know if
can't
that's a
cast
thing.
spells when you're shape changed or
Well, no, but
wild
if you
shape.
change into like the same creature and be able to
Yeah.
communicate with it, like I don't know if that's actually a thing, because you're
I
still a druid, right? Or still
Yeah,
a
I don't think so. But druids definitely can communicate. I mean, you have many spells that you can communicate with animals, with beasts and plants, which players love because then the DM, like I've had to be a squirrel, I've had to be a hawk, I've had to be fish before. Um, and fish are like the dumbest thing that is alive. So,
unless they're
a drought trap.
doubt trout,
Yeah.
because that was a laugh off character. You're like, aha, that sounds funny, huh? Great
Yeah.
character. But then I ran into one of the. I think I was scouting ahead or something. I forgot what character this was, And you
Yeah.
were like, yeah, by the way, you're in you have a lot of water in this dungeon or sewer or whatever it was.
Mhm.
And you were like, yeah, so you see this trout just sort of jump out of the water and look at you. And then my character was completely useless. Like, totally couldn't do anything. I'm just gonna, look at these rocks. Oh, I like rocks. I'm gonna put some mud on my face.
Yeah.
You know, deadly trout.
Well, you're going to love it that I have in the new book, which I'm just finishing the manuscript. I'm just editing, hopefully for the last time. I have a new version of the Dow Trout, which is even more of a pain in the neck. So another pro for druids definitely are all the healing that they can do.
Yeah.
And that obviously when they're in the wilderness, especially, they're very useful. Although there are ways to use the druid in urban areas. We actually have the druid of the undercity in our Monsters of the City book. To give you an example, they conjure swarms of rats, and they communicate with like hawks and birds in the city. And so there are ways that they can be somewhat useful in the city or an urban place, but ideally in the wilderness. And so the dungeon, yeah, you have to hope your DM's being nice to you and made a dungeon so that the druid can be of help, which I think they still can. Cons, lack of armor. So unless you have bark skin, even if you have
Yeah.
bark skin, your armor class is never going to be that high usually. Yeah. What do you think about pros and cons? I think there's a lot of pros for this class.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, is that this is one of those classes where you can, like we were saying before about how in a battle, you can choose to hide and I will turn into a flea and I will climb under this rock and I will stay there for a couple of rounds and then I'll come out. But there's all kinds of things that I think get completely neglected, where there's definitely power in being creative and, well, sneaky in a way. Because being a sneak is not necessarily the territory 100% of the time of like a rogue, but you've got all these different things where turn into a large creature, bring in some creatures, conjure something that's going to be helpful. Being able to really get around like the lack of armor. And I think actually at one time we actually had a druid. I'm not sure if it was a druid, but it was definitely a class that you didn't really do well in cities. Like you were, I think there was a character where you and the player arranged it so that, okay, I want to play this character, I want to play it like this, where it's like a wilderness kind of character, but it's doing very well in the darker places of a large city.
Mm-hmm.
And those kinds of things. That actually worked really well. But it did take some creative thinking, where you had to work with a player to actually say, okay, well, how can I really want to do this? How could I do that? And you're like, well, how about we try this way? And we could have these kind of, parts of the adventure can actually cater to that kind of thing. And those kinds of characters are a challenge to play. And a lot of the classes we've covered already, a lot of them have these little tiny things that I think it just get missed, because especially for newer players, because they really think about, and as you and I are recommending, they think of Dungeons and Dragons as a character in armor with a big sword running into the room and killing whatever's there, and then taking the treasure. Where as a beginner player, it's a great recommendation. You know what? Be simple. This is what a character is. But then delving into different classes and different species and races and things, you can actually have some really creative combinations where, wild shape is such a powerful tool where you can, have like, I had a character, or there was a character once that actually was able to turn into a large bird, was able to carry people around an obstacle that was actually quite difficult to get around, and would have, we'll have to walk back 20,000 meters and go around and then climb back up this other, where the character was like, actually, no, wait, I could be like this big bird and I will carry you one at a time to get across. So there's all kinds of things you can use. It's not always about, running into the room and killing everything. There's all kinds of other things that these characters can do. And a lot of the time, I mean, I'm guilty of this too. You're really thinking about, I'm going to be a scorpion. I'm going to grab them twice and then I'm going to sting them and it'll be great. where instead I could actually be like, you know what, I could turn it into something maybe more useful, and hopefully, um, tsunami. But anyway,
Yeah. Earthquake.
earthquake. Oh my god. But yeah, I mean, and the idea of you're talking about the shroom, what was it called, tree stride,
Circle of the
shroom
Shrooms.
stride, like being able to like,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
going to go in here and I'm going to be over there. And like, to me, tree stride is something I would never have considered. But you could say, the character's got you backed into a corner. Oh, look, there's a tree right here. Zoop, and suddenly you're maybe in a tree 20 feet away behind the creature. So hopefully
Yeah,
there'll be
I think
something like
that's
that.
one of the great parts about the druid is that you can more than almost any other class, you can use the environment, right? As
Exactly.
helping you, especially if you're out in the wilderness. So, if there's stone, you can have there's spells that connect to stone. If there's trees or plants or animals or even water, maybe you have water breathing and you need to escape and you jump into the river and swim away. Hopefully you don't meet any doubt trout.
But I mean, that's the thing about the game is that, first of all, it's only a game, but two, uh, being a creative thinker, I mean, these are skills that as a player you kind of learn over time, and it takes a while to kind of get there. Like if I've played with people that like myself have a background in theater, and so it's a bit easier for you to kind
Mhm.
of go, I'm going to pull out a bazooka and suddenly I'm going to send fire down this creature's throat. But there's a lot of people that have played the game or have just started playing the game, especially where they don't quite have that flexibility in their sort of in their theater of the mind kind of thing, where
Mhm.
okay, you have the DM that goes, okay, you've got this thing and you have this environment and here's what's going on. You have these characters coming this way to come and get you, or these characters are going to come and assist you. And being able to really kind of step outside of the as I always describe it, walking into the room and slashing your sword and kill everything that's there and then take the treasure. Where, yeah, you just have this, and people do eventually get there. I think that's one thing that's really powerful about the game as a human being, that you're actually playing something that trains yourself and gets your brain a little more flexible to kind of go, I have thought of this cool thing where I played it in the game last week, and now I have this real life sort of conundrum I have to solve. And oh wait, I could actually, hey, wait a second, yeah, I don't necessarily have to freak out or whatever it might be, but actually come up with creative solutions in life. So that that's kind of how I treat it. But hey, got
Yeah,
really
very
deep
true.
there.
Well said. Well said.
But I think that barbarians are far cooler. Was that a weird segue?
There's
But
lots to talk about with them, and I think that's what's up next on our agenda is
that's right.
barbarians. We only have a few classes left. I think we haven't done warlocks and sorcerers.
We're doing barbarians, sorcerers, and warlocks over the next few weeks.
Yeah.
And then we're going back to some basic skill stuff about how to build characters and things like that, which a lot of what I just said kind of, I think, plays into it, where creating a character is not just picking a class and a race. You can kind of go, hey, I want to do this thing and I want to be helpful in this adventure. And
Hmm.
hopefully you have an idea of what the adventure's about, where you can kind of go, will I be helpful or will I be a hindrance? And
Hmm.
if I'm a hindrance, that would be kind of cool in a certain way. But then, maybe the other players might not like me so much. But yeah, all kinds of cool stuff with basic rules that, God, there's so much to talk about. Oh my God. I'm
Yeah.
just, spoiler for everybody watching or listening. I'm actually looking at a list that Andrew has written out. And I'm kind of like, oh my God, you're right. We haven't talked about that. We haven't talked about that either. Oh, there's so many things that this game sort of
Yeah.
involves.
Yeah.
Mind blown. But thank you all for watching and listening. We will be here next week for Barbarians and forever. There's so much stuff to talk about, said. And yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you all. Make sure to share the show, tell people about it. Click all the things, subscribe to the thing down below. We're also on Twitter. We have all kinds of stuff out there. And of course, we have an audio version of the show that you can go and check out, which the link will be down below. And yeah, thank you all for that. And thank you all for giving us feedback, because that's also important. We can only get better if you tell us how much we're awesome. Bye, everybody.
Later.